Hello, and this is Chapter 36. We're going to be covering World War II and the origins of the Cold War. To do this, we're going to start first by looking at the origins of World War II, which for most of you should be a fair degree of review, so we're going to go through it relatively quickly. On the Pacific side, we're going to start with the Japanese invasion of Manchuria in 1931. This was part of Japan's imperialist tendencies. They had long desired the resource-rich areas of China, Manchuria, also known as Manchukuo. Remember, as an island nation, they were resource poor, and as an increasingly industrialized nation, they were going to need access to more and more resources. You can tell from the map on the right the areas that Japan began to take over, starting as early as the last quarter century of the 1900s all the way through the 1930s. Along with this sense of imperialism was this sense of social Darwinism, the idea that they were racially superior, which is why when they invade Manchuria and get to the city of Nanking, Japanese soldiers are ordered to kill the civilian population and impregnate as many women as possible to help build the racial purity and improve the race of the Chinese. This is known as the Rape of Nanking. We see tens of thousands of rapes and hundreds of thousands of civilians murdered. The treatment of the Chinese, particularly at Nanking, has been the source of significant animosity between the Japanese and Chinese that still exists today. What was the Chinese response to this? Well, we see a unified front by the nationalist leader Chiang Kai-shek, here to the right, and Mao Zedong, the leader of the Communist Party, here on your right. Knowing that the Chinese couldn't defeat the more industrialized Japanese on a face-to-face confrontation, they began to use guerrilla tactics. Small-scale attack and retreat methods to demoralize the Japanese and hopefully get them to leave China of their own volition. Japan during this time period is becoming increasingly militaristic, so it's during this time period that we see Japan sign onto a collective security agreement with Germany and Italy, two of Europe's fascist nations, and as well as a neutrality agreement with the Soviet Union in 1941. Remember, this comes on the heel of the Russo-Japanese War, where the Russians, at the turn of the 20th century, are beaten back by the Japanese. Now we're going to look at Italy for a moment. Remember, Italy is part of the Entente, or Allied powers, in World War I. However, they felt as though that they were never given an equal place at the table to the British, the French, and the United States. And they suffered tremendous economic losses in the First World War and felt slighted, as if they had been betrayed by their former allies. So during this time period, we see the rise of Benito Mussolini, who, like Caesar, nearly 2,000 years before, almost 2,000 years before, crosses into Rome with an army and is declared the head of the Italian government. He is a fascist, believing that the individual is secondary to the needs of the state, and he believes in military power and prowess. And so very shortly after heading up the Italian government, he first takes Libya and then invades Ethiopia in the 1930s, killing 250,000 Ethiopians. We have a quote of his to the right, 3 years before he invades Ethiopia, that hits on this conception of fascism. And I know that one of you, I believe it was Matt, read this quote when we were doing some primary source analysis of The Age of Anxiety. The foundation of fascism is the conception of the state, its character, its duty, and its aim. Fascism conceives of the state as an absolute in comparison with which all individuals or groups are relative, only to be conceived of in their relation to the state. So again, the idea is the individual is not important vis-a-vis the state. To continue. We also see Germany during this time period. What we have here on the right is a map of the territorial losses following the Treaty of Versailles. We see this area here, which is given to Poland. We have this area, which is completely demilitarized. Germany is not allowed to put their armed forces here. We have Alsace-Lorraine, which Germany had received in 1871, but which is given back to France. We have this area, which is given to Belgium. And we have the prohibition of Germany uniting with Austria, even though there are many Germanic-speaking people living in Austria, including the soon-to-be Führer of Germany, Adolf Hitler. Just as a refresher, remember the Treaty of Versailles brings about reparations, so Germany has to pay for its conduct as a result of the First World War. They have economic restrictions, they have to demilitarize, and we have Hitler coming to power, who shortly after coming to power begins violating the terms of the Treaty of Versailles and blames Jews, communists, and liberalism generally for the loss of the war and the acceptance of the Treaty of Versailles. So Hitler, very shortly after coming to power, begins to undermine the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler becomes Chancellor in 1933, and in that same year he withdraws from the League of Nations. He begins, in direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles, to rebuild Germany's military, which helps restart the German economy. He takes back the Rhineland. He then takes Austria. He claims the Sudetenland, begins making moves towards Czechoslovakia. And as he's expanding, as he's building up his military, isolating himself from Western powers and taking more and more territory, the former allies, France and Britain, do nothing to stop him. And we have this quote to the right where he talks about the need for strong men to have Lebensraum. Remember, Lebensraum is the idea of living space. And strong men have a duty to take living space. And if they are incapable of doing it, then it's up to stronger men to do so for him. Now, I wanted to show you this map. Again, this is the attempted German return to greatness. Here to the right is the map we just saw, the areas that are given away following World War I. Now take a look at the territorial acquisitions by Germany. First in 1933, when Hitler comes to power. 1939, as we lead in towards World War II, taking more and more territory, some of which he was forbidden from taking. And in 1943, in the midst of World War II, again, reclaiming the land that had been taken from them following World War I. So it's important to understand how Germany's reaction to the Treaty of Versailles is directly reflected in the territorial acquisitions during World War II. So, during this time period, how do we cope with a rising Adolf Hitler, who's violating the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, who seems to be pushing everyone towards war, and who takes more and more and more territory? Well, in 1938, we have Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, who's trying to appease Germany, trying to get them to stop their territorial expansion and prevent a second world war. In 1938, Germany says, we will stop with the Sudetenland. If you give us the Sudetenland, we'll no longer continue to expand. In 1939, of course, Hitler violates that agreement, seizing most of Czechoslovakia, but more importantly, in that same year, Germany and the Soviet Union signed a non-aggression pact, a fascinating turn of events because Hitler was so ardently anti-communist. So the idea of a non-aggression pact between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union took the world by surprise. No one thought that that would happen. Essentially, what this agreement does is it says that the Soviet Union and Germany would not declare war on each other, and in exchange, when Germany invades Poland, Germany would get half, the Soviet Union would get the other half. While this is going on, again, you have the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, who's trying to avoid war. And here we're going to see a short video clip of him and his hope following the signing of the Munich Agreement that we would have, in his words, peace in our time.
The settlement of the Czechoslovakian problem, which has now been achieved, is, in my view, only the prelude to a larger settlement in which all Europe may find peace. This morning, I had another talk with the German Chancellor, Herr Hitler. And here is the paper which bears his name upon it as well as mine. Some of you perhaps have already heard what it contains, but I would just like to read it to you. We, the German Führer and Chancellor, and the British Prime Minister have had a further meeting today and are agreed in recognizing that the question of Anglo-German relations is of the first importance for the two countries and for Europe. We regard the agreement signed last night and the Anglo-German naval agreement as symbolic of the desire of our two peoples never to go to war with one another again.
Again, ominous words, the idea that our two countries will never go to war again. And in 1939, just 1 year after the signing of that agreement, we have the failure of appeasement. Hitler violates the Munich Agreement, invading Poland, consistent with the non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union, and here's the response from the now despondent Prime Minister Chamberlain.
I am speaking to you from the Cabinet Room at 10 Downing Street. This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
So appeasement fails. The idea of trying to console Hitler, give him what he wants in the hopes that he wouldn't continue taking more, is a failure. And Neville Chamberlain is seen as one of the great failures of the 20th century and one of the worst prime ministers in British history. This is going to end section 1. We're going to start section 2 with total war, now that World War II has begun.